It says so on the agenda. What I have done for beginning this conversation is put back up something which I'm assuming will be so common knowledge to all of you folks by the time this conference is over. A lot of what we've tried to do at Workplace Flexibility 2010 is to create some new terminology. And you saw this morning. So, and I know this is very hard to see. I guess maybe these lights went on again. But I want to say something before I ask David Fortney and Deven McGraw to give their sort of comments and reactions in terms of from a policy perspective. But to have you guys thinking, because remember, you are the last segment of this conversation, right? In terms of turning it to you. You heard this morning, and it was very interesting to me that this morning that basically everyone who talked, to the extent they talked about anything specific about policy, for example, for short-term time off, for episodic time off, or extended time off, talked about some of the bills out there that mandate, that employers should pay this, should give this. I know that not everyone in this room thinks that's a good idea. I mean, the whole point was to bring people from different perspectives. So I'm going to be asking some more pointed, specific questions just to make sure that we have a conversation that reflects what are the challenges in doing some policy approaches as opposed to others. Again, the point about this conference is not for us to come to a consensus policy position, for example. We have an entire project set up called Workplace Flexibility 2010 in which we're trying to do that. Okay? Instead, what we're trying to do at this conference is surface some of the issues and questions and needs and bring a perspective from the academic research, from business practice, and then just to start off the conversation, small, initial comments in terms of policy. But I do, this is just about making this room safe for all points of view. There's a very specific reason why in workplace flexibility we don't call the middle column paid sick leave, right? and when we we've had reactions from groups that say, well, we know how to get short-term time off. You just mandate paid sick leave, or you mandate the bill that Heidi Hartman talked about. Okay? That's one point of view, and there are arguments for that. Okay, but what we are just doing, both in our project and in this conference, is just surfacing the need, surfacing the data, and then opening a conversation about what might be the policy responses. So I certainly hope that we get the full range.
And I would just add, along with other things. Policy is not the only response by any stretch of the imagination.
Right. And that policy is not the only response. That's the point about the overall national initiative, of which we are just the policy component, and there's an entire whole set of voluntary efforts, of which Kathy Lingle is a huge component of that. And that's why I think those comments, a lot of them are talking to what can you do in terms of a voluntary business efforts, what will work, what will take, So with those opening comments, I'm going to turn to David and then to Deven.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, keep my thing.
Thanks.
Oh my God.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you to the hosts for the opportunity to be here. I guess I come to this with more of a business community orientation. Have been involved in policy issues. I'm a card-carrying Republican, so for whatever that's worth. Probably in Washington, D.C., that makes me a protected minority because you cannot engage in political discrimination. So I can feel the love in the room here, but just some thoughts. Contrary to some popular views, most businesses, I won't say all, but the vast majority of businesses, in my experience and in my view, care a lot about their workers. And it's not because they're benevolent. It is because they have a big investment in their workers. And typically, it is the workers that enable them to succeed in a competitive environment. And whether you like that or not, that is the business model on which it's based. Now, with respect to unions, there's been some touching reference, and I think a lot of people perhaps nostalgically opine for unions, think about the role of unions. Let's get real. In the private sector, not public sector, in the private sector, unions are essentially not even part of the discussion anymore. They're down to representing 6% or fewer. When it comes to talking about salaried, they're not representing any significant part. And when it comes to hourly employees they represent, these sorts of issues rarely, if ever, are raised at the bargaining table. So unions, I just don't view them as really being part of the focus. They're not part of the solution. They're not part of the problem. They're just not part of it. Now, there may be lots of interesting discussions as to what could or should happen to address that, but that, I think, is the current status. With respect to hourly employees, the low-skill, no-skill jobs, those are the toughest, candidly. The workers are the most fungible in that sense. They require the least amount of training. The employer has the lowest level of investment and commitment to that workforce. And they're the ones that it becomes very hard, because most of those jobs, you have to physically go to work to do the job. If it's changing a bed, cleaning a room, being a server at a restaurant, you have to show up. So, looking at it from that perspective, if we're going to allow people not to show up, that means we need more workers, because the work still has to get done. In order to have more workers, the transactional costs are greater. Workers, it's more than just paying their salary. You have the training, you have the administration, you have the benefits. And contrary to popular belief, most people don't use exclusively independent contractors to avoid paying benefits. Most people want W-2 employees. And they want that because they can train them, they can invest in them, and they'll do a better job. So I think the challenges and the options on flexible work arrangements for the lower hourly employees are much more challenging and much more limited, simply because of there's not as much, quote, flexibility in those jobs. As you start to move up, take American manufacturing. What's left of American manufacturing are high-skilled jobs. Many of them typically are hourly, not exclusively, but they're high-skilled jobs. There's a tremendous investment in that workforce, tremendous investment. As the employer gets more invested in the worker, and I think Kathy's point is, and she used the extreme example, the partner with a $6 million portfolio. Okay, they're very invested with that individual worker, and they're going to do a lot to make her happy and keep her as part of the workforce. But on a more generalized level, down at a factory setting, where you have workers that you have, because, look, we know in the manufacturing process there's been a lot of consolidation. There's a lot of computer and technology use, a lot of high-skilled training. Those are not fungible workers. So once you train them, and often you're sending them away, you're doing a lot to invest in them, you want to maintain them. And again, that raises several issues. One, it incentivizes the employer to find ways to be more responsive to workplace, competing workplace demands, whether that be family, whether it be a whole range of things. I call them personal choices. Increasingly, workforces are talking about those issues. And believe it or not, most employers, particularly when they're faced with the prospect, I may lose this person unless I find some way of tailoring this job opportunity, are responsive. They try to find some way of doing it. With regard to HR can either, as Kathy pointed out, can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. Some HR people view their jobs as cost containment. And more often than not, when you, again, deal with HR people that deal with the lower skilled workforces, that's how they view it, cost containment. I want to minimize tardiness. I want to minimize turnover. I want to up. Whereas HR that deals typically, and salary is often a good proxy, but the higher skilled workforces recognize increasingly that productivity is important. People do a better job if they like their job. Even if they don't like it, if they, at least they feel they're being treated fairly, that there's some level of responsiveness to what their needs are. Many companies do recognize that and try to find ways of dealing with it. As you go further up and start moving into the salaried, obviously all of these little doodads, right, are BlackBerries and stuff, and all the electronic devices that we use make the ability to have those jobs done at different locations with different work hours much easier. And I'm surprised actually that we haven't seen more flexibility in response to that. Federal government, until very recently, has been extremely slow to respond to that. I don't know why, but they have been. They've been very, very conservative. And I don't mean politically conservative. I mean just they've been reluctant to deal with that. And there still are a lot of issues, even for those jobs that can be done off-site. Lawyers happen to be one of those, know something about that job. A lot of being a lawyer can be done somewhere other than your office. You can do research online, you can talk to people online, you have teleconferences, blah, 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 all of which is fine. But it does, am I getting the hook?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. I'm just getting warmed up. All right. 60 seconds. All right. In terms of from a policy perspective on what we do with this, I want to underscore that this concept of paid time, I just want to keep this in mind. There is no free lunch. And if you're going to require time to be paid, it is coming from somewhere. Someone's going to be laid off. Someone's hours are going to be cut. It is going to come out of that slice of the pie. So don't be naive and think that that's going to solve the problem. What will cause paid time off is when workers demonstrate productivity and employers are therefore responsive to that and say, good, I'll expand more paid time off because the workforce is more productive. Okay, I've got a lot more I'd like to say, and if time permits, I'll do so. Thank you, Heidi.
Absolutely. And like I said, we have this morning, we sort of, as I said, making sure that we have both the Democratic and Republican perspective and business and employee perspective. And we have actually benefited from hearing David's comments and perspectives over the last 2.5 years. And we've also benefited from hearing perspectives from the National Partnership, Women and Families, as well as others. And even though Deven McGraw is no longer from the National Partnership, I'm sure she'll still be able to channel some of that energy. So,
yes, I certainly hope so. And it was actually my experience being at the partnership, working on working family issues at a policy level, but also being in a position of being a manager of the organization of 35 employees. It definitely gives you an interesting insight into these issues because you sort of stand in a couple of different roles. You're advocating for a better changed world while at the same time experiencing the world we live in and the need to get things done. So I'm going to start by saying that I thought all three of the presentations were very provocative this afternoon. I unfortunately couldn't come this morning, but Tamar's was definitely the one that hit me the hardest. I think all along, the National Partnership, and I think those of us who do this work on behalf of employees know this is a structural problem. But we are bumping up against, and I think David's comments illustrated this probably better than anything could. We live in a culture where the corporate interest isn't necessarily well tied in to some notion of advancing public benefit and public good. And what I mean by that is, there is the corporate imperative, which is to make money, which is an important societal goal. At the same time, there are other overarching societal goals that corporate model needs to fit into, and that should include promoting robust family life, promoting personal life for those of us who don't have children, but also the notion that even when you think about it in an employment of people with disabilities context, the notion that we need to be able to employ all people doesn't always work very well when you're talking about the private sector where, if I have to make an accommodation for somebody, that's going to cost me money. That person isn't, maybe not as valuable a worker to me unless the benefits outweigh the cost. Thanks. So So how do you get to, from a policy standpoint, to the cultural change that sees these as societal issues and not just those to be resolved by and managed by an individual who then feels guilty about it all the time? And I don't think that's easy, again, in part because we have this long history in our country of sort of individual liberty and the way that corporations have grown in this country. But I do think it is possible. And one of the things that strikes me is that the flexible work arrangements component of the Workplace Flexibility 2010 agenda might be the least amenable to a policy change because of the need for things. Now, I'm not weighing, not saying that it's not, that we should just strike it off the list and move on to something that's more doable. But I do think it's more difficult, and we're having these conversations, and I know the workplace flexibility team is, about ways to provide incentives through and create a better structure for either enabling people to either ask about it, or even more important, again, because we're looking for structural change, is to have measurable outcomes that tick those numbers that we had a demonstration of up in really measurable ways, for hourly workers in particular, but for salary workers as well. I do think that the other thing that struck me about Tamar's presentation was the notion that we don't just have a cultural issue with respect to work expectations, because this may make it easier for me to work from home, but I got to tell you that this also means I'm 24/7 on the clock. It's the same way with email. These tools that are supposed to make it easier for us to be more flexible may, in fact, be putting us on the clock all the time, and there isn't really any countervailing forces, at least not from a policy perspective, and arguably not from a cultural perspective either, to keep that from happening. And so I think as we sort of think about how do we push the seed change, again, the flexible work arrangements piece of it may not be the easiest. When you look at the sort of episodic time off, short-term time off, where it's a lot easier to think of those things in terms of a requirement, this is a cost of doing business in this country. This is what we need to do, in part because we value business, but we also value the lives of our employees. And a policy like that connects the two together and, again, sort of gives you this sense that we're all in it together. I'll just wrap this up. Boy, she's good, isn't she? She just moves to this seat right here, and she says, hurry up. I'm not going to take the union comment that David made on, because I'm not really qualified to do that because I don't do organizing. But I do have to say that to the extent that some of the change that we're looking for might be best facilitated with employers and employees at the table working out the right best solution for that particular company and industry, to say that unions don't have a role there or shouldn't, I think it is a real shame. So.
Back up. Thank you very much. I actually think that, and I know these were very short, 5-minute pieces, but I did come right at the 5 minutes so that we can have our half-hour conversation. And I'll let the two people that I'm planning to ask to talk, the way I called on Sharon, I will say in 1 second. But I do think you did here actually very nicely, succinctly put, just at least in this middle column of time off, two very clear, distinct perspectives. From Deven, it's a cost of doing business, and subtext unsaid, but I think I can say just suck it up. Okay? And
if only we could do that, Kai. I don't think
okay. And then another perspective of saying, look, let's be real, there's X amount of money, and you say, I'm going to need to do paid time off? Okay, well, let me tell you, you're not going to get something else. Now, if the two positions were really just like that, I would never have taken money from Kathleen Christensen to try to come to any consensus-based solution. Okay? But the thing is, those are two very real positions. And then the question is, in our sort of conversations, and again, this conference is just about surfacing some of it. There's a whole other process, like I said, that we exist to try to help facilitate. to see whether there is something different that can be done. And just so you know, both Deven and David, for example, serve on our National Advisory Commission, which is a very explicitly rhetoric-free zone. Okay? I didn't want them to be rhetoric-free in this presentation, and thank you very much, neither of you were. Good. Because it doesn't help you guys who don't live in Washington to not hear some of the strongly held positions on each side. So, but now I'm going to open up for conversation, and then you didn't see, but what we did in the morning is I'm just going to have comments from folks. This isn't so much questions to you. This is them joining into the conversation, but at the end, do what I did this morning, and starting from Deven and ending up with Lonnie, sort of reactions and comments. So again, the way I had turned to Sharon Daly, who is a longtime lobbyist for Catholic Charities, I hope, you don't have to, but I hope Kara Welch, who's the newest lobbyist for World at Work, might have some comments she might want to share. In addition, Carol Joyner, who was here this morning, had to leave, but she is for the afternoon, but she will be in the roundtable tomorrow, and I have a question specifically about unions for Carol. Carol Joyner is also on the NAC. But Netzie Firestein is still here, and I have a feeling she might have something she might want to say about unions. I don't know. It's just a thought. Okay, so if that's, you can pass if you don't, but otherwise I would go with Kara, Netzie, and then if I could get hands in terms of keeping a list. Donna, Ariana. Who else do I have? Okay, great. So, Kara. But you can also pass, but you don't pass. You can also pass, but don't. That's sweet, I know. Okay.
Can everybody hear me? Is this on?
No. Put it back on.
Hello? Is that on now? No. Really? Okay. All right, I'll put it really close to me and I'll talk really loud. How's that? First, I should say that, just really briefly, that World at Work is has just recently registered for the lobbying disclosure, and it's only because the laws have all changed and lots of other people are registering as well. But we don't take positions on bills. We do talk a lot about our research and our surveys, and our goal from the public policy perspective is really to provide the best information from our members, from our surveys, to public policy makers so that hopefully they're making public policy based on something a little bit stronger than anecdotes. So that's basically how I see my role. So in response to what I've just heard, and this, I had not expected to speak here. I was sort of already thinking ahead, which is very dangerous. But Salaried, in terms of this particular position, or where we heard all of these different things, I do have a couple of responses. To Tamar's presentation, I've already told her this. This really hit me as well, because I am a working mom. And I won't see my kids for the next 48 hours because I'm here. And there's always important things that you do, that you have to do as part of your job, that are important. So I just think that's kind of an ironic little twist here. And we had that exact same conversation this morning, actually. So that was showed on the video. But in terms of, there's a lot of different issues here. And in the professional side, I would say that there's a lot of, you have to really look at where people are coming from and what their own personal perspectives are on these issues. And in the public policy side, that's what you deal with a lot with legislators. They bring their own personal viewpoints to the table about what they think the goal should be. And the one thing that keeps popping into my head, and then I will just pass it on to the next person, is that some of us may have very different end result goals for what we're trying to achieve. And is that, could it be that we're all looking, some people say that they're looking to have moms at home. They want the moms at home. They want to be able to have them at home for the, the young part of the children's life. Other people say, well, we need more moms in the workplace, or we need parents to have more choices. And I think bottom line, we want more choices, but in the end, a lot of us are looking at whatever that personal end result goal is, and it doesn't always match up to what the data is showing, perhaps. So that's what I'm just going to throw out now, having been put on the spot and not expecting it.
Great. Netzie, do you want, I just put you, do you want to take that microphone? How could you not? Of course. Okay.
I actually wasn't going to take this on, but Peter said I had to. So, well, what I would say, I don't want to get into a discussion based on some of the stuff that David said, but I think what a role that unions play that is really critical is that unions have somewhat set a floor for where the rest of us need to be, around minimum wage, around benefits, around, we know that we're working on paid sick days in California. We know that this isn't an issue for the unionized workforce because they have paid sick days, they have paid vacation days. So I think that that is a role that unions play around this, and actually contrary to what David said, I see these issues being negotiated all the time by unions, that they are on the bargaining table. So I think that's really a critical role that unions play. And while I have the floor, the other thing that I would say is I think Tamar raised really critical issue around this being a collective issue and not an individual issue, which we just see all the time. And actually we see it with unions where a lot of times union members don't think, oh, you mean childcare, flexibility, paid leave, are these things that I can bring to my union meeting? And that it isn't just an employer-employee issue. It really is a broader issue. So I don't know quite how we attack it. Sometimes I think, maybe it's a public campaign around why this is good for everybody and why it's a societal issue and not an individual issue. But
great. I've got Donna Klein.
Thank you. I have maybe 40.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Donna Klein, Corporate Voices for Working Families, and I have probably 42 years of experience in the private sector, all with big corporations. So I think I've got a lot of insight as to the issues, and I've heard some remarkable things said this morning. In case you're keeping notes or proceedings from this meeting, I just wanted to take issue with my dear friend Kathy's statement that businesses don't care about families. That would be like saying businesses don't, because they didn't want to pay for family medical leave. That would be like saying businesses don't care about baseball if they're not going to buy every employee's season's tickets. I mean, it just doesn't compute. I think it was kind of, and I know she was trying to be provocative, but in case you're doing proceedings, I want to make sure that's on the table. So.
Okay, and what I'm going to do after Ariana and Patty is just turn back to both Kathy and David, because I actually think both of the comments, business doesn't like family and also unions are irrelevant, are actually shorthand for deeper, sort of more nuanced positions. So certainly in terms of conversations I've had with both of you. So after the two that are on the list, I'm going to turn back to the two of you in terms of being able to talk about that. And then other people who want to be on the list, please raise your hand. Okay, so Ariana.
Ariane Higovish, Institute for Women's Policy Research. I had a couple of comments. I guess David got everybody thinking and replying, which is a wonderful thing to do. The first issue is, yes, a lot of businesses are working on flexibility and are responding to workers' desires or needs for more flexibility over working time. But you can see, if you look at the Family and Work Institute latest survey, some employers do, some employers don't, and the trend is towards stalling. There hasn't been a big up move, and the economy over that period that was measured, if anything, it's been reasonably good. So you would expect those issues to grow further. So the question is, how can it be pushed a little further? How can employers be pushed a little bit beyond their comfort zone to experiment with solutions which at first look they would think this is too expensive, too complicated, can't work. And I think their public policy comes in. How? I'm not quite sure, and different country and whatever. The second an example in that vein is New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand is a small titsy country, but it has a very deregulated economy. And it recently has passed a law, a right to request law, for flexibility, whatever you think about that. And employers originally were really opposed to that because they were saying this is not needed, you're just adding layers of regulation and bureaucracies, we're doing it anyway. And so the people promoting it, the Department of Labor said, okay, let's see whether that's the case, let's step back for a couple of years and do a survey. And the survey found a lot of employers didn't do things, and they were losing workers, and the economy was losing out because of that. And the Chamber of Commerce, or whatever it's called in New Zealand, actually changed its position and said, all right, maybe we need to do something. We cannot afford to lose workers, and if, maybe it helps, and go ahead with the law, and the law has been passed now. It's just being, it's about to be implemented. I'm going to speed up. I'm German, as you can hear, very unionized place, high labor cost, export king of the world or queen of the world, to China, to anywhere you go, in spite of high labor costs, and flexibility is a huge issue in that, because companies like Airbus, high technology, I was thinking about this because you said manufacturing in the US now tends to be highly skilled technical workers. And they had to sit down, and they often had unions as partners with partners to say, okay, how do we cope with the restrictions on how we can use working hours, and have come up with lots of examples which often have also helped employers but do give something back to employees. So I think that kind of, as Deven was saying, some frame which helps people to talk and employers to negotiate is important. And the final issue is, where do you have most flexibility in the US? Is actually in the public sector. And this is very often, public sector has been under enormous pressures, but you still have unions, they have to serve staff, they have to come up with solutions, where you're there a lot of the time, and you get a lot of, flexibility is a recruitment issue, but you also get innovative ways of organizing work. Those lots of points I just wanted to throw on the table.
Okay, I've got Patty from Choose to Lead. Then I'm going to go David, Fortney, Kathy Lingo. Then I've got Shani and Chris. And so if anyone else wants to, Susan. Okay, right. Go ahead. So now I'm Patty.
Okay, I'm Patty Reed with Choose to Lead, and I wanted to make a few comments. One is regarding this discussion about considering additional mandatory requirements. Our experience at Choose to Lead and interviewing people in organizations in transition is that many businesses have told us, oh my gosh, don't give us more requirements. It's hard enough to manage what we have on the books now. I mean, we saw the pile of statutes earlier. What they told us that was especially interesting is even within an organization, they have conflicting managers. The HR manager, their job is to keep their folks out of the lawsuits. The manager in the business office, he is managing to the bottom line. And then they've got the work-life person in some of the organizations these days, and they're viewed as kind of doing nice things, but really just another layer in the process. So they're not all playing well in the sandbox together. So I wanted to just bring that perspective as saying, from what we're hearing, the last thing people want is more mandates and more requirements. The other comment I wanted to make is that there's been a lot of global kind of macro discussion, and from the micro perspective, drilling down into an organization a little bit. What we're finding is that, the global flexibility, that's one thing, or if it's supported on high, that's one thing. But what really matters is the role of the individual supervisor. The immediate supervisor is the one, in many cases, who's created a culture within a culture. And they're the one who has the relationship with the employee, and that really makes a big difference. It also depends on the industry. Certain industries are high growth and are really looking for people, as you said, the highly skilled technical people who really need people and are willing to do some innovative things to keep that competitive advantage going. And lastly, flexibility, I think, as we all agree, it doesn't work in every situation with every job. So again, I just want to be cautious and caution all of us on staying away from these global sweeping statements and trying to remember that when it comes right down to it, we're going to need to be at some point specific, because it will only work in certain cases.
Okay, so I now have David and then Kathy, and then I have Shani, Chris, Susan, and Amy. So. Okay, thank you. A couple of brief comments. I didn't mean to strike as much of a nerve on the union issue, but I did. And so let me just say, my only point, my starting point there was, it is a fact that in the private sector, 95% of the workers do not have a union. 94%, 95%, pick whatever number you want. The vast majority are not represented by a union. So in order to deal with
their situation, the union's not part of that. Does that mean that the union efforts haven't resulted in some efforts that are worth looking at? Sure. I mean, we could look at that, and I take that point, and I think that's exactly right. But in terms of kind of how we're going to get it done, to the extent whatever it is, and getting it done in the next 10 years, unless there's some dramatic shift, the private sector, it's not going to be carried directly by the union collective bargaining process, in my view, for that reason, just because they don't represent a critical percentage of that workforce. Several comments, Deven made one and others made one, about the importance of employers and employees sitting down and conferring. I want to underscore that. I think that is very, very important. I think there's lots of data, statistical and anecdotal data that demonstrate, and it varies a little bit depending on the value of the worker, but that there is often a real interest and desire, and that the parties often can do a pretty good job in first making each other understand what their constraints are and their desires are, and then trying to tailor whatever may be appropriate. Often the individual saying, gee, I'd like X and Y, and then the employer says, okay, but you're the only one that knows how to run the widget machine that has to run between these hours. How do I get that job done? And sometimes there's a way to figure it out, and it gets done, and sometimes not. I mean, silly example, but often that exchange. So picking up on the thought of New Zealand, and we've looked at New Zealand, and we've looked at some of the other international models, and this concept, which is in my view sort of the lowest threshold, not mandating a result, mandating that the parties will confer, a right to request and a right to confer, similar to the duty to bargain that is I mean, a lot of our experience is informed by the collective bargaining experience in the labor laws that have been on the books for half a century, so we don't approach this in a vacuum. That's something, personally, I think is worth looking at. I think that's something because it's not a mandate, it's not a one-size-fits-all, it allows the customization. But the duty to bargain is not the same as the duty to reach agreement or reach a preordained result, and that's probably where a number in the room would have a problem with that, because it may not promise or yield as much as is there. The final thing I would point out, I find a huge disconnect between the private and public sector. The public sector affords comp time instead of overtime for those that are eligible. Now, no one's suggesting that the public sector is mistreated or disadvantaged in some ways, and many people want more time off. All of our studies say that, all of our experiences, and many people find that they can achieve that in the public sector employment. Our laws, in my humble opinion, make an absolutely stupid distinction that says that the private sector cannot provide comp time. I can't tell you the number of times that employees, that's typically, if you sit down and talk with employees, they say, you don't even have to pay me overtime. I don't want overtime. I'll just take time off, time and a half. I work an extra day. You give me an extra day and a half. I'll work with you when it works. That would help me, blah, blah, blah. The law does, so we have a lot of legal constraints today that retard parties' efforts and desires to craft flexibility. The law is very paternalistic and very restrictive, and if we really want to get to the nub of it, we should not have these artificial distinctions between private and public sector in that regard. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy.
The danger of a 5-minute soundbite is cramming way too many thoughts with no context. So the point I was trying to make about business and families is actually they're schizophrenic. And I think business is doing a tremendous service to families by defining what family is and making sure that the changing nature of families actually, in a way, gets funded. I think it's a great example of a proactive business stance, which gives me great courage to think that other business stances where the money is behind it could actually take place, is what I meant to say. Having said that, in actual practice in business, it's certainly been my experience that families are messy and businesses don't really want them on campus, and there's some implications to dealing with families in real life that get swept under the table.
Right. I mean, that's sort of piece of that families are messy. I mean, I think any of us who are managers can think about, oh, yeah, do you really have to have that family issue? Now, we are also hopefully good human beings, and so after the sinking feeling of, you have that family issue, is how are we together going to help you deal with that family issue so that we all together can continue to be productive. But that's a particular mindset of some managers and some supervisors, and not necessarily all. And that's sort of part of the question of how is there any role for public policy in trying to help support and nurture that type of approach. I mean, families are not going to stop being messy. They will be. Okay, just yesterday, one of my staff had one issue. Today, one of my staff had another issue. You know, they're dealing with it. I think it's important that they know that they can turn to me and say, this is what's going on, right? And that we're sort of in it together. But they'll, you know, families are not going to stop being messy. So, okay, Shani and then Chris. Dick?
Hi, Shani here with Families and Work Institute, and I really enjoyed the presentations. And wanted just to piggyback a little bit on what Tamara talked about in terms of some contrast between the U.S. and Italy. Before coming to Families and Work Institute, I was at the French American Foundation for a number of years where I worked on comparative public policy between France and the U.S. in early education, among other things. And similar kinds of contrasts apply there as well. And I think it's just worth underlining that it's not just about a binational comparison, but a larger comparison in which the U.S. really is a bit of an outlier compared not just to Europe, but to the most of the rest of the world, in terms of having an existing public policy framework that's really family friendly and that makes it easier for employees to combine responsibilities to family and to work. So I think that's really important to think that, you know, most countries in the world have figured out a little bit how to think about how to respond to some of these conflicts through public policy. And one thought in terms of thinking about So I just wanted to say that the contrast in terms of is this a personal question, individual question versus a structural question, I think that same kind of question applies in a broader comparative context as well. There have been some comments this morning about thinking about flexibility as a social issue or as a social good, and maybe one way of framing that question is also to think about what the social costs. What are the social costs of not providing more flexibility? And I think that in terms of moving the debate forward about early education in the U.S., I think once economists got involved and started talking about the costs of not providing early education, and ultimately the greater social costs of not providing quality early education, that is a part of what really began to move that conversation forward. So anyway, those are some thoughts.
Hey, Chris, and then Susan, and then Kara.
Thanks. Chris Moret, Fordham University. Two separate points. First, when I hear people talk about the business case, it seems like there's this real, perhaps even exclusive focus on the bottom line. But I think of, and Susan Lambert, correct me if I'm wrong, of your intervention where you had drugstore managers give the schedule out a month in advance to help employees better plan. Is that right? Retail stores. And, you know, the managers, if I recall you saying, liked doing that as well. And so I think it's just we need to think about the organization as a whole, not just the accountants or the people who worry about the bottom line when we think about the business case. And that should be a natural progression because we talk so much about how middle managers can stymie work-family, and there's very little talk about how they can help it. But I think, again, the business case should be thought of much more broadly than I hear it being talked about, and maybe that would uncover some more opportunities. And the second very different point is hearing about the $6 million woman at, was it Price Waterhouse? Makes me think of... makes me take a half step over into my public policy background and think of, we learn about policy windows. And, you have your policy, it should be there in your top drawer ready for the situation to come up. So, we need to have the policy ready, identify the window, and I'm just wondering if we can think about that when it comes to trying to alter corporate policy. So.
Okay, Susan, nice entree into Susan, and then it'll be Amy. Shelley. Okay, I've got, just so you people know, I've got Susan, Amy, Kara, and Shelley. So if someone else wants to be on the list, please raise your hand. Susan.
That was a perfect lead-in to this.
Oh, no, that's not on. Or Bill is... Try Bill's. Just pick Bill's.
Here.
It's on. This on?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Perfect segue into this in terms of windows of opportunity. I think, this whole discussion, does business care or not? People run businesses. There's not business that's out there. I think it's really important for us to to recognize that. But there are business models, right? There are variations in business models, and some business models place a higher value on workers in terms of their role in making a profit. And certainly I study lower level jobs, and businesses vary a lot in terms of whether they see, right, people at kind of the front lines of organizations as, again, this whole idea of a cost to be contained or a resource in which to invest in it. But one of the things that strikes me as I, over the years, have worked with businesses is that even the businesses who want to do the right thing, where everything sounds good, they don't always know what to do. And I don't know why exactly, but I suspect it's like everything. We're always, kind of doing what worked before. And we have these enormous transitions in the economy now. And I think of the work by Chris Tilley and Phil Moss and some other ones. There's this great book on Low-Wage America in which they study industry restructuring in the United States. And so a lot of industries have shifted their whole way that they organize work. And we have missed that opportunity in terms of, as those industrial shifts take place, of making these work and family issues part of the restructuring of those industries. And so I think that is something that I think we should think about more, is that as industrial shifts are taking place, instead of looking at it as though, oh no, the jobs are going overseas, or certain jobs like, the example that they use is in the food service industries, right? There are no longer a lot of jobs in restaurants or hotels where people make salad. Those jobs are gone. Those low-end jobs are gone because there's that big vat, right, out there in Iowa or whatever, where we all get our lettuce now, right? But those jobs, guess what? They're in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing jobs are better jobs than those jobs in the back of hotels, right, and in restaurants. And so we have a whole nother kind of food prep industry that's grown up, and we weren't there to help design those jobs and structure those jobs. The same thing, I know a number of people, Monique does stuff on call centers, and so there is some input into call centers, but we have these industrial shifts, I think, that we don't take good advantage of. The other point I wanted to make is that, I think Steve's point about the Fair Labor Standards, it's the Fair Labor Standards of 1938. I don't think I need to say a lot more. Things have really changed. And, although we might need the protections that are still in there, workers need a floor that fits with the new economy.
Okay, so I've got Amy Richmond, right? And then Kara, was that you, Kara? And then Shelley, and I've got Donna again, and then I'm going to, I think, move to you guys so that we can, and then I'm going to have us break at 4:20 or 4:15 so that we'll start the case study panel at 4:30 instead of 4:20. So Amy and then Kara. Amy.
Just a comment about the cost of flexibility for lower wage workers. And in the study that we're doing now with 6 companies, the companies told us that there's a tremendous amount of unscheduled absenteeism and loss of productivity that has a cost associated with it. And so one of the successful approaches is to build into the staffing model in a proactive way so that you can enable flexibility, and actually it ends up costing less. And it's a win-win. So by implementing things like compressed work week or flex time or just-in-time flexibility, actually it can lower the personnel costs and increase productivity.
Great. Kara and then Shelley.
Hi, I just wanted to just give you just 2 more points from my members in terms of some of the things that we've heard from them, and just reemphasize a little bit of what someone else had said. 2 issues are implementation issues. When you have a mandatory policy that's put into place, my members are the ones who craft the compensation packages, the benefits packages, the work-life packages. They're very specialized. They all want to do the right thing. But the implementation issues that surround interpreting the regulations, understanding how to put them into place, all the costs that go into that make it really difficult. And the second point that goes right along with that is that with mandatory issues that come across what we've heard from our members, and there's certainly a debate, and there's 2 sides to this issue, and we definitely hear both sides from our members, is that when you have a mandatory law that comes into place, it does squelch a lot of innovation, or it can, because the amount of time and resources and money and paperwork that then goes into following that mandatory law then doesn't leave a lot of time for our folks to come up with new programs, innovative programs, and it takes time and costs away from that. So I just wanted to just add those 2 points that, particularly with our members, we're really, really focused with this talent gap coming up, with a lot of people retiring, with a lot of folks not coming into the workforce as fast as we'd like them to. It's just something really important to keep these people here. So this flexibility is the number 1 thing we've seen in studies, number 1 thing that people want to have. But it's really, when you look at it as a mandatory thing, it can be something that squelches innovation within companies.
Okay, Shelley, and then Donna, and then just so I let Mary Ann Mahan know that I'm going to put her on the spot, I just want to have other people hear from other NAC members. So even if you just say who you are and what you do, that's going to be fine enough, Mary Ann. Okay, Shelley.
Shelley Waters-Boots with the Urban Institute. I want to make 3 sort of disparate points. But again, to put things on the table. One is this idea, we've been talking about hourly workers, non-exempt workers, low-wage workers, low-income workers. I want to add a 5th to only add more to what seems like an already very different way of looking at this, which is the low-skilled worker. And I think my experience has been in looking at this and looking at employers is that it's very hard to make the individual business case for that employer around low skill, because in some ways a lot of employers view those employees as expendable. They're not putting a lot of investment into that part of their workforce, and therefore 150% turnover is not problematic or viewed as problematic at the micro level. What I think we have to think about as researchers and policymakers is there a macroeconomic impact for that kind of churning when we talk about the low skills. And I would add that another sort of elephant in the room, in addition to healthcare, is the immigration issue and how that impacts that particular segment of our workforce. Point number 2, completely separate. A study that we did, a small qualitative study of employers in San Francisco on implementing the paid sick leave ordinance, which is at this point the only place in the country that's really got a chance to look at this. And I'll give you the 2 big headlines from the paper that I should be writing instead of being here, but I'd much rather be here. But the paper will be coming later now, is that, 1, employers were able to do it. They didn't like, as Patty said, they don't like mandates, but when they get a mandate, they'll deal with it. And they actually, in San Francisco, were, for the most part, able to pretty much deal with that in a reasonable way. And I would just add that the problem in San Francisco was that this was one of many things on employers' plates. So it's the cumulative effect that we were really looking at. But I would say that what was so interesting across, and this was small and large, this was across industry, was passing this at the jurisdiction level did not make sense to them. So this really does beg for federal policy, because they really talk about this competitive leveling the playing field, that their competition right outside the city line that didn't have these labor cost requirements put them at a competitive disadvantage. And then thirdly, and I'm going to butcher this quote, but I remember Daniel Patrick Moynihan saying this once, that sort of the central conservative tenet is that culture drives public policy, and the central liberal tenet is that public policy drives culture. And really the truth is trying to figure out how to sort of navigate between those. I think that this policy issue is actually something where we have to think about driving it on both of those tracks, especially from Tamar's great presentation, that we really have to be thinking about how to affect the way families think about this and the way we as a culture deal with family and deal with family as it relates to work. And at the same time, and equally importantly, I think we have to think about how we drive these issues from a public policy perspective and address the needs that we see for the collective needs of families. And I don't think that we've yet figured out a way to do both well, but I think that needs to be a part of the conversation.
Okay, Donna? And then, by the way, it's not just Marianne, but there's a reason for asking you to speak. Craig Langford, I'm going to ask you to also just at least say who you are and sort of what perspective you bring to this issue. Donna.
Thanks. Just two comments quickly. One regards the conversation we were having about families being messy. I think we shoot ourselves in the foot, and just a cautionary remark. I know I've made this remark so many times, but the process of being that is human is messy. All employees are messy. I think when we begin labeling everything as, for instance, families are messy, we're speaking to ourselves because our definition of family is very inclusive. The public at large does not define family the way we do. So I would caution us all to make statements that are a general statement like families are messy, because this is about each and every person in the workforce. Second comment is about someone made a statement about business doesn't know what to do. Business is certainly the most innovative sector, I think, in the world, in all countries. But I do agree that sometimes they don't know what to do. But I would counter that by saying, what is the academy, what are academics, what are faculty doing in their business schools to better prepare leaders to lead a 21st century workforce, which is what we're talking about? And my experience is they're doing very little.
Okay. Marianne Mahan and then Craig Langford.
I'm Marianne Mahan. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources here at Georgetown, and I am on the NAC with Workplace Flexibility 2010. I'm going to look at it so I say it right, and we're very proud that it's here at Georgetown University, and I'm honored and proud to be a part of it. And for me, it's really a lot of education listening to all of this. And Georgetown, as an educational institution, has the full spectrum of very flexible faculty and very inflexible custodial workers in terms of what our workplace looks like. So it's a lot to learn. And I think there's more knowledge about professionals and flexibility with professionals. So I've been most appreciative today hearing more about low-skilled workers and what their needs are, I think, and to understand it better. So I think it's great. And the other observation that I've made listening is I think our schools, and I'm thinking about public schools that I'm familiar with, have really done a lot to look outside the bounds of what they normally do. Schools are about educating young, children, and the schools have recognized that there's lots of societal issues that get in the way of children learning in terms of, and so they now provide social workers in the schools. There's before and after school care. So to me, that's an example of how an industry is looking at itself and what it needs to do, and I think it's helping our society. So I think there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to do. So thank you.
Craig Langford, and then I'm going to turn back to you guys. So.
I'm Craig Langford with AARP. Also been participating on the NAC, and it has been a wonderful process just to observe and to learn. Obviously, AARP has an interest in this issue. We represent 50-plus individuals, and I work on 50-plus worker issues with my colleague Sarah Ricks. But we're also interested in the intergenerational benefits of workplace flexibility. And I guess the one observation I would have just from the couple meetings we've had with the NAC and also today is you look at that chart and you look at families and work and the research that they've done and kind of looking over time what's happened, and there's obviously this stagnation of what's being offered in the workplace, and there's this continued, I shouldn't say continued, there's still a mismatch between the real need that's out there and what is actually being offered in the workplace. And so I think there's so much we can do in the way of communication, best practices, innovation, but there's obviously already a lot of that going on. And so the question is, at what point how do you reach all of the other businesses that might not be paying attention to the best practices, that might not be innovative, that might not be connected to the business schools? And I think that really is where there's a huge opportunity for public policy to play a role. And not sure what that looks like yet, but there's got to be something to help create an uptick in that chart.
Great. All right. So I just thank you both, Nancy and Marianne and Craig. I realized as people were talking that just to give you a visual of the fact that at Workplace Flexibility 2010, as we're trying to figure out what would be thoughtful public policy, we've basically set 2 tracks in motion. One is this National Advisory Commission, this NAC, which is primarily made up of people who are formerly the lobbyists for places or formerly the political people. And you heard Susan Hatton this morning, and David Fortney and Deven, who are on the NAC, Craig, Marianne, Nancy Firestein, Sharon Daly, but with very rare exceptions, just basically ARP because of their Choose to Lead campaign, and Nancy because she was basically outside of Washington. They're not the current players who engaged in the game. But we also have, and many of those people are sitting here as well, our second track at the same time, which is talking to all the current players with the same material that we're developing for the NAC. And so, for example, we talked with Donna Klein and Tiffany and others at World at Work, at Corporate Voices, talked to World at Work, the Chamber of Commerce, NAM, then the National Partnership, CLASS, IWPR, et cetera. So this is all part of the conversations that we at least are trying to do as we think about this over the sort of the next year. But I think you've gotten a very nice taste of a lot of those issues. And so what I'd like to do in terms of wrapping it up is really it's just about 60 seconds from each of you about, so this is what I think in my 60 seconds. So, Deb.
What I like most about this whole initiative and this process is that it is working not just on a 2-track with respect to the structure of the project, but also thinking about ways to provide both incentives that spur innovation by companies so that we can change the world that way, but also thinking about how do we trigger the policy lever to either make it happen faster or to provide, quite frankly, the incentive that makes that happen. Otherwise, we might not ever get there.
Mandates are almost always ineffective and wrong. The really good news is that this crowd collectively has recognized a number of alternatives to mandates, disseminating information about benefits to all interested parties in these sorts of arrangements. Clearly, our country needs greater flexibility and needs these issues. They're important. They're important for everyone involved in the discussion. So I don't think there's a strong disagreement about where we would like to go. Now, the methods by which we get there, my sense is we have spirited disagreements still to work through. But at a minimum, it strikes me that the approach of focusing on non-mandates, which covers a big bunch of stuff, is a very useful way to start. And then I think you might find if those prove ineffective, then perhaps additional measures would be appropriate. So measured responses are best. Thank you.
Kathy.
I do.
Mike, to you.
I do think that the phrase mandatory flexibility, which Kara first kind of strung together in the same sentence, and I think you're talking about, is an oxymoron, even more so than when people were talking earlier about mandated overtime. Is that legal? There is something weird about flexibility. And when I was at the firm, when they got the religion, they actually wanted to create the equivalent of the FASB book of regs about flexibility. So it's a tough thing to deal with. It's just a really tough topic. My second thought is that work is really done in teams, going to the theme of the individual and this collective business. In the modern organization,
and increasingly so, work is done in teams. And some of the more innovative, I think Donna's right, there have been incredible innovations that come out of business. And a lot of that work has been done by researchers actually on this floor about what happens when you empower teams to solve some problems. So I think that is a way to look at it. And Lottie Balin told us, 15, 20 years ago, don't do flexible work arrangements for the individual. You're going to put them and hang them out to great risk. So I think we need to go back to think about that stuff.
Great. Amy.
Okay, so I want to call again for attention to the starting from the grassroots, especially because these are the people that are going to vote for the representatives that will make policies and will vote for policies. So we have to start from there. But they are also the ones that have to approach the supervisor and ask for this flexibility once they have the right for it. So we do need to start, not to start only from them, but to recognize that there is a need to give them the ability to see that they need this flexibility because everybody needs this flexibility and it's not a personal problem. Thank you.
Lonnie.
I think it's clear that the demand for flexibility is going to continue to grow. It's going to come from quarters, unlike we've talked about mostly today, from families with young children. But students want more of it. They work longer hours while they're in high school or college. There's going to be more lifelong learning, and adults are going to need more and more flexibility. And so the demand's going to keep growing, and I think we've maxed out and hit the limits of which we can get from tight labor markets, from enlightened, benevolent managers, and we might need something more than the strict business case, because it seems to me that many businesses, present company excluded, and people who make decisions in organizations are either overestimating the cost of adopting these for the people who don't have some flexibility either in their job or around their job, or they're underestimating the benefits. And we can continue to make the case there, but it seems like this is a very worthwhile enterprise, and maybe we should try to model public policy a little more on what just happened in New Jersey or happened in California, where they went outside the business mandate or business pays for benefit. And employees, I think, contribute something like $30-some a year, and it's spread among so many people that you hardly feel it, and enough people, or very few people, are taking these paid leaves. So except for businesses that have to do some coverage replacement for the longer leaves that people are going to take, the expenses seem to be minimal. So I'm wondering if we could model something on that, such as maybe a fund that people kick into, sort of the business that needs to hire an additional cashier because they need coverage, or to make up for the unscheduled absences or somebody's leave. I don't know if I haven't worked this all the way through, but it seems like the demand for this is just going to keep on growing, and all we're going to do is come back every few years and complain about the shortfall, when I think we have some tools to address this.
Well, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that the NAC has been dealing with flexible work arrangements since the first two meetings. We'll do it on its next. Then we're going to move to short-term time off, episodic, and the extended time off. And we're very happy that we have the Urban Institute as a subcontractor, Shelley Waters-Booth as the principal investigator. And she will be looking at all types of possible financing mechanisms and ideas on how to do that in a way that can work economically. Okay, so it is 4:20. I think we take the 15-minute. No. Okay, good. 15 minutes, but we're going to start at 4:35 sharp. Okay? Go out and be free for 15 minutes.
Synchronize your watch. Synchronize your watch. Thank you. Oh, I got the last word. Yeah. Never happened. Well, yeah.
Yes. It was designed for that.
I'm so guilty.
Yeah.
No, it's not. I know that's not the point, but
No. Well, the point.
There's another guilt. If you're a professional, you feel guilty about not being at the workplace and not doing your job.
Guys, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Comments.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed both your presentations. And on a personal note, I'm both a Penn State grad and I grew up in State College. So.
Oh my God!
Yeah. Are you at the main campus?
I'm at Evanston, but I get there a lot.
Okay.
And I want my kids to go there because they have a tuition.